When the history of professional wrestling is discussed, few storylines generate as much fascination, debate, and, what could have been, speculation as the 2001 WCW ECW Invasion of WWE. For many fans, it was supposed to be the ultimate dream scenario, two of the biggest promotions in wrestling history colliding under one roof. The potential was unlimited, the audience was ready, and the industry had never experienced such a unique opportunity. Yet, despite the excitement surrounding it, the Invasion storyline is widely remembered as one of the most disappointing missed opportunities in wrestling history. Over the years, numerous wrestlers, writers, and executives have given their perspectives on why the angle fell short. But few voices carry the weight and insight of Eric Bischoff, the former WCW president and one of the central figures in wrestling's biggest war, the Monday Night Wars. In a recent discussion, Bischoff offered a deep, reflective breakdown of the issues that plagued the WCW-ECW invasion. His analysis paints a complex picture, one rooted not in simple mistakes, but in a combination of financial decisions, contractual complications, creative limitations, and industry expectations that simply could not be met at the time. This news feature examines Bischoff's perspective in detail, exploring what he believes went wrong, the decisions that shaped the storyline, and whether the invasion was doomed from the start. To understand Bischoff's breakdown, one must revisit the environment of 2001. WCW had collapsed after years of financial mismanagement, network politics, and internal dysfunction. WWE, then WWF, purchased WCW's trademarks, tape library, and a small selection of contracts. ECW, facing severe financial struggles, filed for bankruptcy around the same time, giving WWE access to yet another rival legacy. Fans expected an era of crossover dream matches, Goldberg vs. Austin, Sting vs. Undertaker, Hogan vs. Rock under the WCW banner, and countless fantasy combinations. For many, the idea of seeing the biggest stars from each company clash on WWE programming was everything the Monday Night Wars had built toward. But that dream quickly met real-world limitations. According to Eric Bischoff, the single biggest issue with the Invasion storyline was the absence of WCW's biggest household names. While WWE purchased WCW, they did not purchase the expensive Time Warner contracts held by many of the company's highest-paid talents. Wrestlers like Goldberg, Sting, Scott Steiner, Kevin Nash, and Hulk Hogan were still contracted and getting paid by Time Warner to sit at home. Bischoff explains that WWE was not going to spend millions to buy out contracts while also paying performers on WWE salaries. Financially, it made no sense. This created a major creative problem. The WCW Invasion force lacked the legitimacy, star power, and intimidation needed to feel like a true threat. Instead of appearing as an invading superpower, WCW was represented mostly by mid-card talent, many of whom were unfamiliar to the WWE audience. Bischoff emphasizes that without Wu's top-tier stars, the invasion was essentially handicapped before it even started. Fans could not buy into the storyline because the characters they associated with WCW dominance were not part of the fight. Another key point Bischoff highlights is that WWE was forced to use its own stars to carry the angle because the new arrivals simply lacked the recognition and credibility that Wu's audience was accustomed to. As a result, wrestlers like Stone Cold Steve Austin and Kurt Angle became the central figures of the Invasion storyline, something that contradicted the entire concept. If the story was meant to be WCW versus WWE, but the biggest WCW battles were being fought by WWE stars themselves, the illusion quickly fell apart. Bischoff suggests that WWE was trying to create drama and excitement, but the imbalance was too great. WCW could not stand on equal footing without its original icons, and that alone limited the storyline's potential. Many fans were shocked when ECW unexpectedly joined the storyline, forming the Alliance alongside WCW. From WWE's perspective, this added depth and unpredictability. From Bischoff's perspective, however, the integration created another layer of confusion. ECW had its own identity, rebellious, hardcore, gritty, and anti-establishment. WCW was corporate, flashy, and big production. Combining the two promotions into one unified force blurred their identities and weakened the authenticity of the conflict. Bischoff argues that ECW should have been handled separately or used in a different type of conflict altogether. By merging ECW with WCW, WWE diluted the individuality of both brands. Bischoff also notes that WWE's booking team, while talented, viewed the story entirely from a WWE-centric perspective. In other words, WWE was the hero of the story, and WCW, ECW were the villains. That perspective meant the outcome was predetermined. WWE would ultimately win, and the invaders would be presented as inferior. This created structural limitations in the writing. WCW and ECW were never given sustained momentum. Even when they scored victories, they were framed as lucky or temporary. WWE stars, Austin, The Rock, Undertaker, Kane, and others, continued to dominate. Bischoff argues that if WWE truly wanted to capitalize on the invasion, it needed to treat WCW as an equal threat, even if only temporarily. Another major issue Bischoff pointed out was the timing. WWE rushed the storyline into motion shortly after purchasing WCW. Fans barely had time to process the idea that WWE now owned WCW before the invasion angle began. Bischoff believes that a slower build would have allowed fans to become familiar with WWE's new environment under WWE ownership. That familiarity could have built anticipation and created stronger emotional investment. A delayed approach, perhaps introducing WCW talent over several months, would have created more value. Instead, WWE tried to capitalize on momentum too quickly, sacrificing long-term payoff for short-term attention. In the storyline, Shane McMahon led WCW, while Stephanie McMahon took control of ECW. Stone Cold Steve Austin eventually led the Alliance. Bischoff argues that placing WWE figures in leadership roles further diluted the authenticity of WCW's presence on TV. WCW never truly existed as its own entity in WWE. It was always being filtered through the McMahon family. To audiences, this made WCW feel like a storyline prop rather than a genuine rival. Bischoff suggests that WWE missed a huge opportunity by not making him the on-screen leader of WCW. Fans associated him more closely with WCW than anyone else, and bringing him in later, as WWE eventually did in 2002, only highlighted that the invasion lacked his presence. One of Bischoff's lesser-discussed observations involves the presentation of WCW matches on WWE programming. When WWE began airing WCW segments on Raw, the audience reacted with confusion and even hostility. The lighting, pacing, and commentary style were different from typical WWE matches, and WWE fans were not accustomed to WCW's in-ring presentation. This led WWE to rethink how much WCW content they could safely air without risking negative crowd reactions. According to Bischoff, this further limited how WCW could be portrayed and developed during the invasion. Bischoff points out another major factor: the backstage environment was complicated. WWE wrestlers had spent years fighting WCW. In real life, many were not enthusiastic about putting over WCW talent, or losing to stars who were not yet proven in WWE's system. WCW wrestlers, meanwhile, entered a locker room with established hierarchies, alliances, and politics. They were in unfamiliar territory, and morale suffered as a result. This dynamic made it difficult to build unity or long-term creative trust, something Bischoff emphasizes as essential for major storylines. Bischoff also acknowledges that WWE's business pressures influenced their decisions. The company had just invested a large sum in buying WCW. They needed to generate immediate returns through merchandise, pay-per-view buys, and ratings. While creatively a slow burn might have worked better, financially WWE needed to capitalize quickly. Bischoff notes that this tension between art and business contributed significantly to the invasion's rushed execution. Eric Bischoff believes the invasion had the potential to be the biggest storyline in wrestling history. However, the circumstances surrounding it, the absence of WCW's top stars, the financial limitations, the rushed pacing, backstage politics, and WWE's creative direction, made success extremely difficult if not impossible. He argues that the only way the invasion might have succeeded was if WWE waited at least a year before launching it, allowing time to renegotiate contracts, establish WCW as a legitimate brand, and slowly build toward a massive cross-company showdown. Instead, the rushed approach created a storyline that felt incomplete, uneven, and far from the dream scenario fans imagined. Despite its flaws, the Invasion storyline remains one of the most discussed chapters in wrestling history. Fans still debate how it could have been improved, which matches never happened, and how different things might have been had the right stars been available. Bischoff's breakdown adds valuable insight to that discussion. His perspective highlights not only the creative missteps but also the real-world challenges that shape the storyline behind the scenes. In the end, the WCW-ECW Invasion stands as both a historic event and a cautionary tale, one that reminds everyone in the wrestling world that timing, talent, and careful planning are essential for turning fantasy into reality. And as Bischoff's analysis makes clear, even the most promising ideas can falter when the pieces simply don't align.